Most of what we know of berserkers are from sagas. Sagas, at the very least, must be rooted in some facet of Nordic life, belief, and culture. But how much is legend and how much is truth? How much was changed from when they were orally told to when they were written down? We may never know. There are eyewitness accounts from other nations that face berserkers in battle, of which I will include, but they are also few and far between. Whether berserkers are just stories, or real elite warriors with animal pelts, I'll leave it up to you to decide. Either way, it is an awesome study, so let's dive in. The term berserker comes from the word ber, meaning bear, and serker, shirt. The phrase is a bit convoluted, however, as it can refer to wearing a bear skin, bear shirt, and bear as in the animal bear, or as in bare shirted, bear as in naked, meaning wearing no armor. It could also refer to wearing the spirit of a bear, i.e., embodying the characteristics of a bear. In one way or another, all three of these interpretations can work, as we will see. These warriors hailed from Scandinavian and Nordic regions and are found in Nordic sagas, as well as in battle reports of Greeks, Romans, and Anglo-Saxons. They were even recruited into the Varangian Guard of the Byzantine Emperor Constantine. Snorri Sturluson describes berserkers in the Ynglinga saga as this, quote, "His men," referring to Odin by the way here, "went without mailcoats and were frantic as dogs or wolves. They bit their shields and were as strong as bears or boars. They slew men, but neither fire nor iron could hurt them. This is known as running berserk." End quote. With this information in mind, we can use them as a springboard to uncover the details of these fearsome warriors. The best way to understand this idea is to first take a look at the role of animism in the Nordic world. Animism is an umbrella term for a belief that all things, animals, plants, inanimate objects, etc., have spirits. The realm between the material and spiritual realms are blurred and can often intertwine. More specifically, under the term of animism, it is thought that the Norse practiced totemism. Daniel McCoy, who wrote the book The Viking Spirit, An Introduction to Norse Mythology and Religion, writes this on his website, Norse Mythology for Smart People. Quote, "Totemism is a relationship of spiritual kinship between a human or group of humans and a particular species of animal or plant. The totem animal or plant is generally held to be an ancestor, guardian, and or benefactor of the human or humans in question. The totem animal or plant is sometimes held to overlap with the human self in some way. As his training progressed, imitation gave way to identification. The warrior achieved a state of spiritual unification with the bear or the wolf, which would frequently erupt in bouts of ecstatic fury. This bond was displayed to others by the warrior's dressing himself in a ritual costume made from the hide of the animal, an outward reminder of the man's having gone beyond the confines of his humanity and become a divine predator. It is hard to imagine a grislier or more frightening thing to encounter on the Viking Age battlefield." End quote. These animistic warriors are not a new idea or one that is only found in this region. For example, the Aztecs also had animal warriors. Ocelot, jaguar warriors, and Quetzalcoatl, eagle warriors. This could go even further into actually shape-shifting into a certain animal, which is found everywhere in the sagas of the Norse. Humans and deities alike could transform into eagles, ravens, wolves, bears, and boars, or have a special connection to them. In the saga of the Volsungs, the hero Sigmund and his son, Sinfjotli, don wolf pelts and become wolves for 10 days until they can take off the skins. In Rolf's saga, a berserker by the name of Bodvar Bjarki was said to be sleeping in the king's tent during battle. While he was asleep, a bear was seen tearing through the enemy forces. When Bodvar is woken up and enters the battle himself, the bear is nowhere to be seen. The other defining quality of a berserker is the Berserkergang, or the berserker's fury. This blood-red rage would consume the mind until it couldn't be held back any longer. Berserkers would yell and holler, biting their shields in madness, fighting like wild animals without care of personal injury. Reading a quote from the Viking Spirit, an introduction to Norse mythology by Daniel McCoy, quote, "In the year 970, the Greek historian Leo Diaconus witnessed a band of far-traveling berserkers as they fought against the army of the Byzantine emperor, his employer. He says that they fought in a burning frenzy, beside which ordinary battle rage paled in comparison. They roared, growled, bayed, and shrieked like animals. In an especially eerie and uncanny way, they seemed utterly indifferent to their own well-being, as if lost to themselves. Their leader, who embodied all these traits to an extreme degree, was thought by Leo to have literally gone insane. Leo and the Byzantine forces were veterans of countless battles, so the reactions elicited by the Scandinavians' behavior in Leo and his companions strongly suggest that what they witnessed in the battle was something unique to the Scandinavians, and something which chilled Leo and the Byzantines to the core." End quote. It is this rage that the sagas mention the supernatural effects of hardened skin that no man can slice. Put a pin in that, and we'll circle back to this and how berserkers achieve this trance-like state in a little bit, as well as Odin's role in all of this. So the question is, can I become a berserker if I don an animal pelt and go berserk? Well, not exactly. Not all berserkers wear bear pelts, or even pelts at all. Viking armament is a bit of a messy topic, as there aren't a lot of written works on the subject, just bits and pieces from sagas, eyewitness accounts from enemies, and archaeological finds, especially from burials, of which, fortunately, there are only a few. Of a surety, a typical Viking soldier's armor included a helmet and a circular shield. The rest is up to debate. Unlike modern depictions, Viking helmets did not have wings or horns on them. The idea of horns came from an opera in the late 1800s AD. Horns and antlers came from the horned headdresses found with a ritualistic context, including war dancers, but not within battle itself. The horns do look really cool. The shield was roughly 90 centimeters in diameter and was made of linden wood, as well as fir, alder, and poplar, with a steel or iron boss in the middle. Sometimes, a layer of leather would be added on it to add durability and some fire resistance. A steel rim was sometimes also added to strengthen them. Later in the Viking Age, kite shields were used instead of the round shields. Chainmail shirts of the 4-on-1 type were called brynja, which would only have been worn by the more wealthy. Leather was very expensive to make, so it is suggested that a quilted cloth gambeson, linen or hemp canvas, and or furs were used as armor. Lamellar armor was found in Sweden, but it is unclear if it was worn by Vikings or mercenaries. Vikings would also plunder any gear off any fallen soldiers, so anything is possible. For weapons, a knife, or the larger knife, seax, was kept for close combat. A spear or axe would be the most common weapon. A spear had two types of head, a hooked spear for stabbing, and a chopping spear for chopping or cutting. The hooked spear had wings on it, used to stop it from getting stuck in an enemy, as well as to disarm and guard. Axes were almost exclusively single-headed. The popular depiction of a double-headed battle axe was a waste of precious metal. The large double-handed axe was called a Dane axe. Smaller one-handed axes were the most common, and the bearded axe was another favorite, as they were very good for hooking shields and pulling them away from a shield wall. Less common would be the atgeir, or Viking halberd, but these may only be found in sagas. Swords were for those who were favored or wealthy, as the metal required to make them were in short supply. Both the single and double-sided variations were seen. For range, a sling or bow and arrows would be used. There are two opinions on the armor of a berserker. Either the animal skin and no armor, or armor with the skin on top. I say animal skin because there was a difference among the berserkers. Berserkers who wore bear skins were berserkers, and those who wore wolf skins were called wolfhednar, wolf shirts. Reading different stanzas from the Haraldsvardi saga, translated by Neil Price, quote, "They, the ships of Harald's fleet, were loaded with farmer chiefs and broad shields, with Vestland spears and Frankish swords. Berserker screamed. The battle was on. Ulfhednar howled and shook their spears. Of the berserker fury I would ask, about the drinkers of the corpse sea, blood. What are they like? These men who go happy into battle, Ulfarnar they are called, who bear bloody shields in the slaughter. They redden spears when they join the fighting. There they are arranged for their task. There I know that the honorable prince places his trust only in brave men who hack at shields." End quote. Ulfarnar were spear wielders and were mainly found amongst the king's guard, and were in groups no larger than 12. While this is a clear distinction, the two often blend or get categorized under the umbrella term of berserkers, of which I will also do likewise again. Berserkers were used as shock troops, placed at the vanguard of the army or prow of a ship to not only strike fear into the enemy, but to also disrupt the enemy line. For this reason, berserkers rarely ever, if at all, dual-wielded, despite modern depictions, as being in the front was a very valued but vulnerable position. In order to become a berserker, there are a few varying ways in the records for initiation practices. Like the example of Sigmund and Sinfjotli, surviving in the wild to take on the traits of a bear or wolf was required. In Grettir's saga, an act of bravery and skill is needed, like killing a bear and bringing back a token of that victory. In other cases, it's more ritualistic, like war dancers that would dance with weapons and headdresses in ceremonies. The Norsemen that made their way into the Varangian Guard danced in a similar fashion, which the Byzantines called the Gothic dance. Lastly, and probably one of the most common ways of becoming a berserker, was entering into the cult of Odin, through the symbolic mark of consecration by a touch of the spear. Odin was many things, but of particular interest, he was the god of war and religion. Odin's name consists of two parts in the Old Norse. Od, meaning inspiration, ecstasy, fury. The second part, in, is the definite article, the. Odin was therefore the inspired one, the ecstatic one, or the furious one. He was the god of rulers and outcasts, which will be important later. He chose the most elite soldiers to fill the halls of Valhalla to train for the coming war of Ragnarok, trying to defy his fate of death at the hands of Fenrir. These warriors, so often mentioned of being Odin's, are frequently called the Berserkers. As we saw in the quote in the Ynglinga saga, his men went without mailcoats and were frantic as dogs or wolves. They bit their shields and were as strong as bears or boars. They slew men, and neither fire nor iron could hurt them. This is known as running berserk. In her book, Gods and Myths of Northern Europe, author and professor H.R. Ellis Davison says this about the ecstatic fury of the berserkers. Quote, "Odin was also the god of the dead and supreme practitioner in magic, with the ability to inspire his followers and grant them the ecstatic, trance-like state of intoxication, the ecstasy of battle, which inspired the berserks and filled them with such madness that they knew neither fear nor pain, was naturally viewed as a gift of the same god. In his warrior paradise, Valhalla, men were said to divide their time between battle and drinking. These were two means by which they could, while on earth, achieve forgetfulness of self, and it is therefore fitting that they should be the only occupations in Odin's hall." End quote. We also get some insight into at least one band of berserkers from the Vikings of Jormsburg that existed during the late Viking Age. No one under the age of 18 or over the age of 50 was allowed. You could not kill or harm anyone within the band. No words of fear or despondency were allowed. No women were allowed to stay within the stronghold that they lived in, and no one could flee from a battle with someone of equal strength. Unfortunately, there isn't any documented training regiments that the Berserker had. Berserkers are mentioned many times in the sagas, dueling others in what was called a holmgang. Lifting logs and rocks, farm work, rowing, and wrestling were all physical activities that built muscle and skill. The biggest experience, however, would be combat drills and life on the battlefield. Speaking of training, how did Berserkers achieve the fury-like state of the Berserkergang? Well, here's the thing. We don't know definitively. But, we do have some guesses. The first idea is drinking of animal blood, as it was believed that doing so would grant the consumer the strength and qualities of the animal. Unfiltered animal blood can pose a risk though, as harmful bacteria, viruses, and parasites can enter a human system, perhaps they could also lead to madness. A more popular thought is the use of alcohol and/or hallucinogenic substances like the Amanita muscaria mushroom. The last idea that I came across was putting oneself in a state of utter exhaustion, PTSD, and stress. One clue that can give us insight into the matter is taken from Egil's saga. A berserker by the name of Skallagrim was playing a ball game with his son and his son's friend Thord. In the excitement and exhaustion of the game, he grabs his son's friend Thord and slams him into the ground, killing him. Then he grabs his son to do the same, but a servant woman begged him to stop. He dropped his son and killed her instead with a boulder. While this may be an embellished story, there could be some insight into the truth of how berserkers behaved outside of battle. What makes this interesting is that no intoxication was needed, simply the stimuli from playing a game caused his body to react as it always does on the battlefield. In the same saga, it says, quote, "It is said that people who took on the character of animals, or went berserk, became so strong in this state that no one was a match for them, but also that just after it wore off, they were left weaker than usual." End quote. During adrenaline rushes, humans can do incredible things that they normally could not do. Chemicals are released, increasing blood flow to the muscles, allowing for amazing feats of strength. Cortisol that is released shuts down the immune system, which is why a berserker wouldn't feel the fiery inflammation that usually occurs on wounds. When the rush is over, our bodies will begin healing itself again. The pain would then be felt in earnest. Exhaustion, aches, and pains. It is quite possible that Berserkergang is some sort of mixture of all these ideas in some way or another. Whatever it was, berserkers were absolutely terrifying to face on the battlefield. In one sea battle, a berserker by the name of Thor Hawklong fought against Harald Fairhair, holding Harald's victory at bay until he was finally killed. And as the foeman's ships drew near, the dreadful din ye well might hear, savage berserks roaring mad, and champions fierce and wolfskins clad, howling like wolves in clanking jar of many a mail-clad man of war. Thus the foe came, but our brave king taught them to fly as fast again. For when he saw their force come more, he launched his warships from the shore. On the deep sea he launched his fleet, and boldly rode the foe to meet. Fierce was the shock and loud the clang of shields unto the fierce Hawklang, the foeman's famous berserk fell. Then from our men burst forth the yell of victory, and the king of gold could not withstand our herald bold, but fled before his flaky locks for shelter to the island rocks. His name is Harald Fairhair. I love that line. So good. While not specifically mentioned as a berserker, the Battle of Stamford Bridge showcases the ferocity of Nordic warriors. Taken from page 209 of Chronicle of Henry of Huntingdon, which comprises the history of England from Julius Caesar to Henry II. Quote, "When this intelligence reached Harold, King of England, he advanced with a powerful army, and came up with the invaders at Stamford Bridge. The battle was desperately fought, the armies being engaged from daybreak to noonday, when, after fierce attacks on both sides, the Norwegians were forced to give way before the superior numbers of the English, but retreated driven in good order. Being across the river, the living trampling on the corpses of the slain, they resolutely made a fresh stand. Here, a single Norwegian, whose name ought to have been preserved, took post on a bridge, and hewing down more than 40 of the English with a battle axe, his country's weapon, stayed the advance of the whole English army till the 9th hour. At last, someone came under the bridge in a boat, and thrust a spear into him through the chinks of the flooring." End quote. In what one might call a cheap shot, outside of life and death, this man is stabbed in the groin from under the bridge.
That's gotta hurt! It's gotta hurt!
No one could pass him otherwise, for he held the whole English army back for many hours as his comrades regrouped. If this was not a berserker, imagine how much more destruction may have been wrought from an elite warrior. What is even more interesting is that the King of Norway, who was leading this Norwegian army, was none other than Harald Hardrada. who had earned incredible fame among the elite Varangian guard that protected the emperor of the Byzantine Empire. He had returned home and won his kingship through battle, but lost at this battle of Stamford when facing the English. He was said to have fought with no armor and the fury of a berserker, but an arrow to the knee, an arrow to the throat ended his life, and with him, the end of the Viking Age, as he was considered the last Viking king. This brings us to the sad side of the Berserker life. While the Berserkergang brought great power, it also brought great tragedy. Like Skallagrim in Eagle's Saga, many Berserkers became outcasts, as they could fall into a fit of rage and harm those around them. While strength and skill in battle was a great honor among the Viking society, so was loyalty and fidelity to family and friends. When Berserkers raged, it was often that they killed everyone in sight, friend or foe. As many songs and tales as there are about the might of the Berserkers, there are perhaps even more about Berserkers being villains and outlaws, who use the Holmgang just to kill and trouble villagers. It is no surprise then that Odin is also the god of outcasts. His Berserkers were outcasts themselves, and he didn't discriminate acts of strength. As long as skill and power were shown, he would take them to Valhalla. With this danger in mind, as well as the rise of Christianity in the region, King Eric of Norway in 1015 AD outlawed the practice of Berserkergang, and by the 12th century, Iceland also passed the Grágás, a medieval legal code that pretty much ended Berserkers and other practices. Nevertheless, men knew that the Berserk, free though he might be for a time from fear and pain, was not inevitably a victor. He might be cut down in battle, for all his strength and furious courage, or wake from his frenzy to find himself crippled for life. The vows made at the ale drinking to accomplish wild and daring deeds could bring bitter regrets when the men who made them were sober again, as we are reminded more than once in the heroic literature of the North. I hope everyone enjoyed the history behind the Berserker class that we find in many fantasy settings in books, video games, and tabletop RPGs. Like and subscribe if you are inclined to do so, and I will see you all in the next one.